I'm realizing with a lot of these methods from bar, these newer methods, is that you have a frequency that informs the nervous system to show you information specifically about a category of points. For example, with the self-heal frequency, we find the gold point, it ends up being the yin organ itself. The silver point ends up being the emotional kind of context of that, or the emotional blockage to the healing of that yin organ. You could say it in that way too, right? And so the same thing with the negative chi, right? So here's where you're storing negative chi in your body. Here's an emotional point or a psychological point that relates to it, that is perhaps helping to maintain the dysfunction. So yes, so I actually have been then applying that theory to other things like the diabetes frequency. So applying the diabetes frequency, find a gold point, find a silver point. At first it's kind of just to see what comes up, because we know as a base theory of what we're doing with auricular medicine is we're working with resonance. And when you and I, Duvan, were talking with Dr. Porges just the other day, one thing that he said really struck me about his safe and sound protocol is inputting an acoustic frequency that actually physiologically vibrates the inner ear in a very specific way, and which is resonance, right? And so what we were talking about was how that's something that is very mechanical, whereas what we're talking about here is more on an electromagnetic level, but essentially is exactly the same thing, where you have a frequency and you're finding a resonance with that frequency, right? So if you input the frequency of insulin, you're going to find a resonance only of points that are associated with that frequency, with that information, right? And so I wanted to bring it one step further, and this is something that I'll be introducing as well in level 3, is the idea of, instead of using a laser frequency, using the frequency of memory. And so a lot of this relates to trauma. And one thing that I have been doing in my clinic with great success has been to encourage the patient to go back into the memory of a particular trauma or a particular person who's involved in a trauma, or whatever element makes them feel kind of uncomfortable with it. Now, this clearly would only work with people who are ready for this, right? Ready to actually sit with that for a minute. While they're holding that in their mind, in that moment, I then search for a gold and a silver point, okay? And they have to be able to focus on that and not be distracted, because it relies exclusively on their ability to hold this trauma memory in their mind while I am searching for a point. If they get distracted and they lose that, then the frequency is no longer being applied. That's like turning off the laser. Well, actually, it's more like turning the laser onto another frequency. There's so much complexity, and this is why I think it's so unique to do it this way, because we would never, in my opinion, we'd never be able to find a number of hertz that would match the personal complex experience of a person's trauma. And so for me, this is why I started doing this method, is because we can find resentment as an emotional context. We can find an age, we can find a part of the body that's associated. All of these are kind of fragmented elements of the trauma itself that get us closer to solving what that trauma is, to resolving the memory of that trauma. Using that as an information filter for the auricular points that you're finding, I feel is very powerful. And very specific. It's very specific, and it's holding that whole complexity of that trauma kind of in one moment.